Hey y'all, so welcome to Poli-Side-Eye. We're back again. This is my co-host Jared, JC Tiger fan, my expert political scholar to help me with this. It's been a crazy news week in politics, I think.
Yeah, I mean, politics are crazy every week, but especially this past week or actually the last few weeks, I feel like have been pretty crazy.
Right. It's been crazy in my realm of pop culture and housewives. So we'd like to take a little break into equally important matters.
I would hope at least equally, but
So we're going to be talking about two topics. First is Governor Cuomo being ousted from his position as governor of New York. It felt like it happened like a month ago. It only happened like a week.
yeah, last week I believe he announced that he was stepping down. So yeah,
Wow.
but so much has happened since then, so it just seems like that was eons ago.
That story came and went like a Normani song. Seriously.
I'm not gonna shake her like that.
But yes, Afghanistan, it's so crazy what's going on. Like when I saw like the video, it's just so disturbing.
Yeah,
And then that video, you saw people like clinging to the plane for life and then falling from the plane.
yeah. I mean, the images were just completely harrowing. Like I don't even know how to articulate what we see. It's just, and so much of it was kind of, I don't want to say predictable because I think that gives people too much credit. Like we're not, we don't have the foresight to predict the future, but there was at least some indications from some of the things I had read that underestimated how powerful the Taliban actually was. So, but we can talk about that.
When I think of Taliban, I just think of automatically terrorists. Is that true? Like they're just terrorists?
I wouldn't say that's not the right language to use. I would say they are an authoritarian insurgency organization. So the Taliban, I believe, it's technically came into existence in the early 90s. I want to say 94 officially, but we also have to remember that since the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in the 80s, many people who ultimately became a part of the Taliban were a part of that dispute. So some people kind of really trace the unofficial origins to the Taliban to that conflict, but officially they've been an organization since the mid 90s. But I wouldn't say a terrorist organization. So they do engage in very oppressive actions, especially they're very misogynistic. But I think to conflate that with a terrorist organization, I think is not necessarily the right way that I would describe it.
Well, before we get too ahead of ourselves, what's the gist of what's going on in Afghanistan for someone that just isn't familiar?
So the first thing I would recommend is I saw in the New York Times today, there was a story, and I think everybody should engage in this type of exercise because this is the type of thing I do when I'm reading about quote unquote foreign policy. So the name of the headline was America's Afghan War, a defeat foretold. And then the subheading was recent history suggests it's foolish for Western powers to fight wars in other people's lands and that the US intervention was doomed from the start. Now, that was the headline in the subheader. Now, in the actual article, the author goes through essentially trying to give a play-by-play of everything that's happened in Afghanistan over the past 20 years. But I did a quick search in that article just to see if the two words imperialism or capitalism were mentioned at any point in the article, and they were not. So I say all that to say is that although in America it's weird because we tend to bifurcate domestic issues and foreign issues as though they're somehow like not connected. And I think when you do that, it kind of mystifies why war exists in the first place. So I think even before we talk about what goes on in Afghanistan, I think it's important to talk about why does America or any nation or whatever engage in war. And so what we're told in high school or in middle school, we take American history, it's like, oh, America fights all these wars because we just want to impose democracy everywhere. And that should be on its face kind of questionable to most people. So like, why, even if that were true, how does America stand to benefit from another nation ostensibly being democratic? Crickets. Like you never get any sense of like what I mean, just are they just doing this for purely altruistic reasons? Like surely we know that's not the case. So when we think about Afghanistan, we also have to think about like the geography of Afghanistan and like geopolitical where Afghanistan is. So it's a landlocked country. So around Afghanistan, you have Iran. We've known for decades now what's going with the situation between the US and Iran. That's been an ongoing thing since the 70s. We know on the other side, there is, I think China has a border with Afghanistan for a sliver in the kind of the northeast corner. There's also Pakistan. And so we have to think about like, okay, we also know that Iraq is not very far away from Afghanistan. And we know with all of the oil deposits and so on, why America has had their eye kind of focused on Afghanistan. So I don't think you can parse America's involvement in Afghanistan from like the geopolitical reasons for us being there. So I say all that to say, you're not going to get that in the news. What they're going to tell you is that this is a natural retaliation because Al-Qaeda, of whom their members are based in Afghanistan, attacked America, and we were retaliating against that. That's what you're going to hear in the common story. But I would really urge people to really think about the history and the geography of that region, but to really get a sense of like, what are really the motives that are driving U.S. involvement in Afghanistan? I don't think you can separate that from oil, from just geopolitical power, especially with Afghanistan being kind of sandwiched in between what was once the Soviet Union. Obviously, it doesn't exist anymore. Increasingly, the conflict that the U.S. has with China. It's not just enough to think about the tactical things that have gone on in Afghanistan, but also think of like the broader political questions about like, why is war waged in the first place? And like, why is it that America always has, you know, its hands in damn near everything? And so I think when you start asking some of those questions, and then you go back and read this article I was talking about in the New York Times, I think you can start to think a little bit more critically about like, okay, maybe what we learned in 7th grade about war just being about the expansion of democracy is probably on its face not true. Now, what's going on now is, well, Biden is kind of finding himself in caught between a rock and a hard place, because Biden announced months ago, I think back in like March, that he was planning to pull troops from Afghanistan. I mean, the reasons made sense. Like his whole thing was like, well, we've been there for 20 fucking years, nothing's changed. Like we've spent well over $1 trillion in Afghanistan. Like what can we show for it? From my understanding is that many people close to Biden, particularly in the Defense Department and others, thought that while America had not necessarily made enough inroads, whatever that might mean, to actually stop the Taliban from taking over again, they were expecting that to be something that happened eventually, not like the day of. And so I think that is what caught many people close to Biden off guard. And so now the question then becomes, well, what do we do with all of that, you know, people who actually live in Afghanistan who are trying to flee this oppressive regime and whatnot? And so I think there's a human question there is, you know, there's obviously so many people, women and children, families who are really the people who are suffering the most from this decision. And, you know, how do we handle them? So I think that's kind of the political question that is happening now about like, okay, all of these people that need to seek refuge, like how do we actually attend to their human needs? So sorry, that was a very long-winded answer, but I feel like it kind of had to be.
So. It was kind of long. Like I was like, damn, bifurcate, Jesus. But didn't America like supply help to Afghanistan so they can stand on their own?
So when we leave, that's always we should always put leave in air quotes, because while we may not have boots on the ground, the notion that America won't have any involvement at all, should know that's not going to be the case. Like there's still probably going to be all types of drone strikes and all kind of other stuff that happens from afar. But insofar as there being like a military presence there, but I don't think we should conflate lack of military presence, i.e. boots on the ground, with a lack of American involvement, because so long as there are questions of power to be answered, America will always be there. And I think that's also important to keep in mind as well. In preparation for this interview, I wanted to do a little bit of homework, because I think it's important for y'all not to think I'm just shooting from the hip, but I'm actually like relying on credible information in work of people who are very much involved in establishing the terms of America's post-World War II order, which America post-World War II is essentially still the America that exists today in some degree, although not quite exactly, but more or less. And so this book is called Public Opinion. It's by an author named Walter Lippmann. It came out I want to say this book came out in the mid-1930s or so. It's an old book, but it's really important because it kind of was the Bible that ultimately served as the foundation for what became the public relations industry. So kind of the background of the book is that Lippmann is essentially arguing that we can't have democracy unless people are told what to think, because people are too stupid. Their imaginations are just too limited. They just don't have enough time to they don't have the range to understand.
I like to think that humans collectively are stupid. Unfortunately, but
I don't think that. I think that people are often ignorant, but it's not because they lack the capacity to understand. It's because people have other shit to do. Like they gotta work to eat, they gotta take care of their kids, and then work is stressful, so then you want to drink and not be worried about fucking politics. So I think people have reasons, like legitimate reasons, for not being that focused on a lot of geopolitical issues, but I don't think it's because they're stupid. I just think it's because people have other pressing things to do, and for a lot of people, it's either read this or not eat. So, I mean, what are you going to do? But anyway, so he says at the beginning of the book, for the real environment is altogether too big, too complex, and too fleeting for direct acquaintance. We are not equipped to deal with so much subtlety, so much variety, so many permutations and combinations. And so what he really says is that people need a map. They need a map of the world, i.e. they need a fiction. They need a narrative. They need to hear how things are connected. It needs to be linear. It can't be too detailed, because then people are going to be like, what the fuck? So what you get in the media is really that. It's a bite-sized.
It's like you're trying to make a Marvel movie or something.
Yeah, right. We've talked about this before. Like, American news is really just story time. It's just about telling a story, but the story it has to be presented in a way that is it seems logically consistent, and it seems like there's some degree of causality, because we tend to think of the world in terms of causality. Like if I kick a ball, we expect it to flow across the street. And so the way that stories are told is often this very linear causal way. But what we know is that the world is way more complex than that. But you're not going to get that complexity. The New York Times is not going to say that part of the reason the U.S. has been involved in Afghanistan is because of global geopolitical reasons related to global capitalism. They're not going to say that. They're not going to say that America has imperial endeavors, and pretty much since its founding has been predicated upon these imperial endeavors, which require us to invade other countries. They're not going to say that. And if you do say that, they're going to cut you off immediately, and you'll never get an invite to come back on CNN. And that's just the way it is. And I really implore everybody to, when the New York Times says things like America's lone war, or America didn't succeed in this war, the question should be, what is success? What would it mean for America to have been successful in Afghanistan?
I'm guessing a free democracy. That's all I could think of.
Like the one we have here, where corporations run everything and people's voters constantly being suppressed? Is that what?
Well, I would think that, Afghanistan, just from looking at the news, I'm thinking okay, well, you have these people being oppressed.
Even if setting up democracy in Afghanistan, which already should be questionable, because democracy is supposed to be something that's built from the ground up. It's not supposed to be something imposed on people. Right. So even if we wanted to accept the idea that we were there to, quote unquote, build democracy in Afghanistan, my next question would be well, why is America so invested in, quote unquote, building democracy in other places?
Right.
What they really mean by democracy is that they want a replica of what we have in America, which is elites run everything. You set up a market-based economy that is participating in global capitalism. That's really what it means, but you can't say that because, again, you'll be censored. So,
should America stay, or should they just get the fuck out?
Stay and do what is the question.
I guess help people.
So I have two answers to this. I have one answer that operates under the assumption that if American officials were ordered to stay in Afghanistan, that they would be there to assist in the people who are trying to set up, or the type of country or the type of place that they envision or would like to be, one that is, have to fear for their safety and their well-being and those types of things. But we also know that American power obviously doesn't work that way. And generally, the types of endeavors that the American state engages in are ones that are driven by America's political, economic interests. And so it's hard for me to be like, yes, because we could do good things when we often don't, or for like 99% of the time. I would hope that more people would try to think about these issues not as just something that's happening over there, but really think about how it affects. It's kind of hard for Americans to think about this in a way that doesn't just like victimize people, because when you victimize people, it takes away any sense of like agency that they have. Like you just like, oh, those poor people. But you really, which in a way is kind of dehumanizing. So what I would implore people to do is to really think about like the role that the U.S. state plays in creating some of these conditions of instability. There was a point at which America has been very much involved in like funding a lot of the insurgent activities in many parts of this region, which ultimately contributes to a lot of the instability. And they do it under reasons that they claim are in the best interests of the world, but really it's in the best interest of America. But all of this is tied together, because if you think about all the money that we spent in Afghanistan, but not just Afghanistan, but the Middle East generally over the past 20 years, but even beyond that, right. How often have we then heard in Congress that we don't have money for Medicare for all? We don't have money to cancel student loan debt. We don't have money for infrastructure. We don't have money for this, but we had these trillions of dollars.
Not even billions, trillions?
Trillions. We've spent trillions of dollars with a T.
Right, I was about to say
with a T.
Well, I'm sure this is going to be an ongoing story. Like, I feel like this problem is going to happen all throughout into next year, probably.
Oh, it's definitely going to be ongoing. I mean, it never went away. It's just that we didn't talk about it because, again, the American media isn't going to, it's not, what was going on 5 years ago wasn't sensational.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, on to the next topic. Last week, Governor Cuomo he resigned. Like, I thought he was just going to stay. Like, he had the power to stay, didn't he? But I felt like less and less people were in his corner. Like, a lot of people were just backing away.
I was surprised when he resigned, because he's always been such a cavalier figure who always thought he was above any type of like political question. Like, it was interesting the way that the New York Democratic Party, really, even some of the more centrist factions, kind of worked alongside some of the more progressive factions to kind of tag team him in a sense. I think there are a certain number of things that he did that made many Democrats kind of come together and find common cause against him. He did some really questionable things with reporting. For instance, he downplayed the degree to which the coronavirus was spreading within nursing homes in New York. So that was a big thing. So I think it's important to think about the type of political figure that Cuomo is. So Cuomo is from a lineage of political figures in his family. So his dad, Mario Cuomo, was governor of New York in the 80s. New York City was on the precipice of bankruptcy in the mid-1970s. And part of what kind of came out of that was the shifting of power from the mayor of New York to the governors, or to the assembly, and to just Albany altogether. And so, for instance, like part of the reason that MTA, the subway system, is run at the state level instead of the local level is because when New York was in the cusp of bankruptcy, the right essentially was like, well, obviously y'all liberals down there don't know how to run shit, so we're just gonna take this from you. And so they took so many powers that were once vested in the city, and now it's all located in the state. Cuomo, somebody who is already power hungry as it is, he wrests from other people the possibility of having a say. And so you see it happen a lot with de Blasio. Like de Blasio would make a decision, and Cuomo would often like be like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. Not because there was no legitimate reason for doing it, but just because he can. So I think the way that he wielded power, I think, made a lot of enemies, people who were who probably resented him well before this whole episode, but because he wielded so much power as governor, were unwilling to like call him out on it. But when there was an opening, I think everybody just like rushed to the door. So I personally revel at seeing his downfall because I've never liked him as a political figure. I always thought he got way too much credit. I hated that how he got so much credit for doing so well with coronavirus when there's so much evidence that shows that he actually dragged his feet on coronavirus. And so that annoyed me just because he got on TV and had a PowerPoint that everybody was like, oh my God, like he should be president. I'm just like, so we're just gonna forget all of the blunders for the first like 4 months of the pandemic. But now because he's perfected like this performance, now he gets all the credit. And so, yeah, I personally enjoy it. And I'm not even one who likes Schadenfreude, but I couldn't think of a more deserving political figure. Well, actually I could, but I couldn't think of many more deserving political figures.
What a fall from grace. It's just crazy how all this came to collapse because you can't control what's in your pants.
Right. And he still denies it. Like he doesn't even admit that. He still to this day is like, I didn't do that, but I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to step down because I want to, I don't want to be suck all the air out of the room, but he is yet to actually acknowledge really the allegations.
It's funny how he could resign, but Trump, he didn't resign from running or anything. It didn't faze him at all.
Yeah. I mean, well, part of this, I think you have to put it in political context. So for Cuomo, he's a fairly centrist Democrat. I mean, he kind of came to prominence when he served as a HUD secretary under Clinton. So the fact that should let you know the type of Democrat he is right there. Like he's close to the Clintons. So he's a very centrist, always been pro Wall Street, pro big business Democrat. And that's the way he's kind of rolled over his political career. For a figure like Cuomo, as long as you have that wing of the party on your side, the corporate wing, you'll probably be okay. But once you lose the corporate side of the party, then all hell breaks loose because then you don't have the funding, the organizational support that you need to actually be effective as a executive. And so his downfall was really a result of the splintering of support he had among the corporate side of the Democratic Party. Like, I mean, once Letitia James, who again is not like by any stretch a progressive figure, started like coming for him, then I think that was a good indication that his support had started to wane even among that side of the party. Now, on the Republican side, I don't think it's a one-to-one because for a lot of people, Trump is doing exactly what they need him to do. So for his core constituency, I'm thinking about the traditional right, like the Bible people and all of that. Like they like the things that Trump done because they typically think that most of these women are making the shit up anyway. And so they're just like, why should he have to resign in face of all these lies? They should have said something when it happened. And so for them, it's like him not resigning is a way for them to be like, oh, this is us showing you like you can't just like lie, and so women need to take accountability. That's the way they think about this. So he's not going to be held accountable by them, and he's definitely not going to be held accountable by the corporate side of the Republican Party because he does what they need him to do. And so for the part of the reason that Trump is never held to account for any of these situations is because his constituency has no reason or no incentive to hold him accountable for these things because they either A, don't think he did anything wrong, or they think the women are just straight out lying on him, or B, like he's actually providing them the material things that they need. And so they're willing to like overlook all the other shit because they're getting big ass tax breaks on that new yacht that they bought. So I just don't think it's a one-to-one comparison. And so to really understand why it is that Democratic officials often resign or have to make public apologies and so on when they're caught in these so-called moral questions, I think you have to really look at the compositions of the party, and they're just parties and they're just different.
Bottom line, the world is awful.
But the world we created. I mean, we're not all equally created, but we all created in some way.
I heard he can run again if he wanted to.
So I was reading about this, and apparently it mirrors the US Constitution. So kind of like with Trump, even if the president was impeached, they could still technically run again. So there have to be some type of like clause or statement that actually says that so-and-so is prohibited or precluded from running again. So my understanding was that it's very similar in New York. So even if Cuomo is indicted on some type of charges of wrongdoing, like he legally could still, or constitutionally, I should say, would be able to run again. So the assembly would have to pass some type of clause or something that would constitutionally preclude him from being able to run again. But I'm 3 years is a long time. He just got up reelected, what, 22 years ago? Yeah.
I remember back then we were talking about it. He's like, well, I thought he wasn't going anywhere. And you said he had 3 years left. I was like, wow. But they got him. We got you.
Yeah.
Who is Kathy? Oh my goodness. Hochul.
I don't know much about her politics. I'm not that familiar with her. I'm just apparently she was in Congress, and then I'm looking at her Wikipedia page, i.e. Wikipedia is not real research, so don't, if this is the only thing you're relying on, don't, but I'm gonna do it right now. And it says that here that they say after leaving Congress, she worked as a government relations specialist with Buffalo-based M&T Bank. So that already leads me to believe that she's probably closer to the Cuomo brand of Democratic politician than, say, AOC. The fact that she left DC to go work for a bank usually gives you, again, like, these things aren't a secret. Like, you can go and look and see where people's money. There's a website called Open Secrets. All you have to do is type in the candidate's name. It tells you exactly who's funding them. So none of this is a secret. Really? So, yes.
OpenSecrets.com.
.org, I think. Yeah, so you can go. I tell people all this time, like, I'm not being conspiratorial. You can go and look and see who's funding these people. Up there. So, my brief impression of her is that she's probably closer to Cuomo than is, say, like an AOC figure, which is part of the course for New York politics. Like, New York hasn't had a genuinely progressive New York governor probably since after the Second World War. So, they've been, but again, a lot of that is an artifact of the fact that New York's economy, particularly in the last 4 decades, has been so driven by corporatism. So even when governors want to do, or even the mayors of New York want to do progressive things, they end up being held hostage. And a lot of politicians ultimately have no choice. They have a choice, but then if they balk at that offer and they don't get the money, then people complain and say that, oh, well, you're having to cut this program, and then it's a vicious cycle. And so I just think it's important for people to know the way that New York is set up structurally, both with respect to politics and its economy, to really understand. Otherwise, you just kind of be like, why the fuck is this all happening with no context?
That's usually me. When does she take power?
It's not immediately. Oh, effective August 24th. So that's, so what's that, Tuesday, Wednesday?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure de Blasio he probably did a backflip because he hates him so much. And he was like,
oh, yeah. I know they hate each other.
De Blasio said, I'm the last man standing. He was on his way out too, but he outlasted Cuomo. So,
wow.
Which is crazy because they actually used to be allies because they both worked for the Clintons. De Blasio was one of Hillary Clinton's main political advisors. And then Cuomo worked under Bill Clinton as his Secretary of HUD. So they both are a part of that. De Blasio was a little bit more progressive, but they were both in that Clinton orbit. So it's just interesting to see how they ultimately became just essentially adversaries.
To give the audience more context, Cuomo is Nene and de Blasio is Kim.
I don't know these people, but oh, you said Nene?
Nene and Kim, like how they used to go back and forth at, and they used to be friends, but they're like mortal enemies on the show.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense then.
But yes, I think we've come to our time. I think this is going to be a larger episode. So your book recommendation is the one that was written in the 1930s?
Yeah, so it's called Public Opinion by Walter Lippmann. So Walter Lippmann, again, it was written in, actually I lied. It came out in 1922. I thought it was in the 30s. So yeah, Walter Lippmann was arguably one of the most, he got the Presidential Medal of Freedom from LBJ. Like, he was one of the most decorated academics of the early 20th century. So he was an interesting figure because he didn't believe that democracy was possible. He just thought people were too stupid, just didn't have a range for us to be a democracy. And so his whole thing was like, just let elites run everything, let people get a few choices when they go to the polls, and just that'll be that. I would definitely recommend that because it's kind of giving the game away. Like, he's essentially being like the point of the news is to tell people what they need to think, not what is actually going on, because they don't have the range to understand all that. They just got to get a bite-sized portion of like what's actually happening, because that's all people can handle, because we just too stupid. And so that was kind of the predominant thought in American political discourse. Really, I mean, it still kind of is. Like, if you listen to the way that people talk about shit, they're like, oh, well, like I saw one tweet and they were like, unless you're an expert on like what's going on in Afghanistan, just like shut the fuck up. And I'm just like, the same experts that got us into Afghanistan are the same experts that now get to speak about what's going on. Like, make it make sense. But yeah. So yeah, read Public Opinion. It's a pretty easy read, I think. Relatively easy.
Yeah, from the size of the book, it looks like a reasonable length.
Yeah, it's like 200 pages or so.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Well, let them know where they can follow you if they have any questions or comments said today.
As long as people don't attack me. No, I'm playing. It's JC Tiger Fan. So JAYC Tiger Fan. And that's at Twitter and on Instagram.
Yeah, and y'all can follow me, of course. Make sure y'all like, comment, and subscribe. I rarely say that on here for some reason, but yeah, like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share.
And tell us what you want us to talk about.
Right, please. Give us some topics to talk about, because yeah, I think everyone should be politically cognizant, politically aware.
You have to prove Walter Lippmann wrong, because he thinks we're all stupid. So we got to tell him that that's not true. So,
but with that, y'all, we will see y'all for our next episode. Bye.